Everyone has heard the famous lines. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. God is dead. Become who you are. They've been printed on posters, tattooed on forearms, repeated until they lost their edge. But Nietzsche wrote thousands of sentences that never made it onto a poster. Quieter ones, stranger ones, sentences that don't flatter you the way the famous quotes do. These are the lines that don't ask to be admired. They ask to be confronted. Tonight, we go past the greatest hits into the Nietzsche most people have never read, and the questions he asks that are far harder to answer. By now, most people know the shape of Nietzsche's life, the isolation, the illness, the philosophy born from watching a civilization lose its old certainties. What's less known is how much of his writing wasn't aimed at grand cosmic questions at all. Some of his sharpest insights were about small, ordinary things: work, boredom, memory, character, solitude. It's often in these quieter observations that his psychology cuts the deepest, because they don't describe philosophers or gods. They describe a Tuesday afternoon. They describe you. Nietzsche noticed something about busyness long before anyone had a word for burnout. He wrote that people labor at their daily work more ardently than survival requires because it's necessary not to have leisure to stop and think, and that haste is universal because everyone is in flight from himself. Read that again. Not flight from a deadline, flight from himself. He went further, observing that when boredom threatens, people either overwork beyond what they need or invent play that is really just another disguised form of work, busyness for its own sake, designed to quiet nothing but the discomfort of stillness. And in one of his sharpest one-line provocations, he called idleness, real, unstructured stillness, the beginning of all psychology. Not distraction, not achievement, stillness. Because it's only in stillness that a person is finally forced to meet themselves. Nietzsche was suspicious of anything that felt automatically true, especially the older and more obvious it seemed. He observed that every tradition grows more venerable the more remote its origin becomes, and the more remote the origin, the more confused it actually is. Age, in other words, is often mistaken for wisdom when it's really just distance from scrutiny. Even more unsettling was his observation about opinions themselves. The first opinion that occurs to us when suddenly asked about something, he wrote, is usually not our own, only the customary one. Our actual opinions, he said, seldom swim near the surface. Which raises an uncomfortable question. How many of your fastest, most confident reactions are really yours? And how many are simply the nearest inherited response, reached for out of habit? Most quote collections treat Nietzsche's love of solitude as simple and safe. The real Nietzsche was more honest than that. He warned that in solitude, whatever a person brings into it grows, including what he called the inner beast. Solitude, he said, is inadvisable to many precisely because it doesn't purify a person. It amplifies whatever is already there. He paired this with a colder warning still. Distrust anyone in whom the impulse to punish is powerful. Solitude, left unexamined, can quietly cultivate exactly this, a punishing, judgmental inner voice, mistaken for depth. Solitude, in other words, is not automatically wisdom. It's a mirror, and mirrors don't improve what they reflect. Nietzsche didn't believe character was something you simply had. He believed it was something closer to a craft.
To give style to one's character, he wrote, is a great and rare art, the deliberate shaping of a self, rather than the passive accumulation of habits and reactions. He linked this to a strange definition of maturity, not seriousness in the adult sense, but the rediscovery of the seriousness a child brings to play. Total absorption, without the constant self-conscious performance adults mistake for maturity. And in one of his most quietly devastating lines, he described how memory and pride negotiate with each other. "I did that," says memory. "I could not have done that," says pride, and remains inexorable. Eventually, he wrote, the memory yields. In other words, pride doesn't just protect your reputation to others, it edits your own past until you believe the more flattering version yourself. Nietzsche's famous line about what doesn't kill you is quoted constantly. His deeper argument about suffering is quoted far less. He wrote that man does not, at bottom, repudiate suffering itself. He desires it, provided he's shown a meaning for it. What haunted humanity, he argued, wasn't suffering, it was the meaninglessness of suffering, pain with nowhere to go and nothing to become. He also turned this lens inward, toward resentment. Resentment born of weakness, he wrote, harms no one more than the weak person who carries it, not the target of that resentment, the one holding it. Independence, in Nietzsche's view, was never free. He wrote that independence is for the very few, a privilege of the strong, and that whoever attempts it enters a labyrinth, multiplying 1,000-fold the dangers life already brings. This wasn't a warning against independence. It was an honest account of its price, something modern quote culture, which loves the idea of standing alone, rarely mentions. He added a smaller, sharper instruction alongside it. One must shed the bad taste of wanting to agree with many, not out of contrarianism, but because the craving to be agreed with is itself a quiet form of surrender. If you've seen our earlier episode on herd morality, these next two lines go further, into territory even sharper than before. Nietzsche warned that the surest way to corrupt a young mind is to teach it to hold those who think alike in higher esteem than those who think differently, not through punishment, through simple, quiet preference, praise reserved for agreement, and cautious silence reserved for dissent. And in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, his imagined last men describe a world where everyone wants the same thing and everyone is the same, where anyone who thinks otherwise goes voluntarily into the madhouse, not exiled by the crowd, self-exiling, because independent thought has been made to feel like illness. Nietzsche didn't believe in a single, neutral vantage point from which truth could be seen clearly. There is only a perspectival seeing, he argued, a perspectival knowing. The more angles, more voices, more genuine perspectives we allow to speak on a matter, the more complete our understanding becomes. Not a single lens, a composite of many. He extended this to philosophy itself, writing that every great philosophy so far has been the personal confession of its author. Even the most abstract, seemingly objective systems, quietly built from the psychology of the person who created them. Which means every philosophy, including his own, is worth reading twice. Once for the argument, once for the person hiding inside it. You don't need Nietzsche's century to recognize any of this. The line between rest and busyness has arguably grown more blurred, not less. Modern life offers infinite forms of productive distraction, engineered specifically to avoid the stillness Nietzsche identified as the beginning of psychology. Inherited opinions now travel faster than ever, repeated and reinforced within hours across entire networks of people who mistake speed of agreement for depth of thought.
And solitude, ironically, has become harder to access, even while physical isolation has become easier. Most people's alone time is now filled with a scream, meaning the inner beast Nietzsche warned about rarely gets the quiet it needs to be examined, or the quiet needed to calm down either. What unites this lesser-known batch of quotes is a single recurring diagnosis. Most people mistake reaction for self. The fast opinion, the busy schedule, the instinct to agree with the room, the pride that quietly edits memory. Each of these, in Nietzsche's view, is a kind of automatic response, passing itself off as identity. Modern psychology has its own language for parts of this: automatic cognitive bias, social conformity, motivated reasoning, ego-protective memory distortion. Nietzsche didn't have the clinical vocabulary, but he saw the pattern clearly and named it without flinching. First, build stillness into your life deliberately, not as a reward, but as a discipline. The kind of stillness that lets you finally notice what you were running from. Second, before accepting an opinion as yours, ask whether it arrived quickly because it's true or because it's familiar. Third, treat solitude as a mirror, not a cure. Examine what grows in you when no one else is present, rather than assuming isolation alone makes you wiser. Fourth, build your character the way a craftsman builds a piece of work, deliberately, with attention, rather than letting habits accumulate by default. Fifth, look for meaning in your suffering, rather than an escape from it. Meaning doesn't remove pain, but it changes what the pain is for. Sixth, notice the pull to agree with the room, and ask what you're protecting by giving into it. Set aside 10 unstructured minutes today with no phone, no task, no goal, and notice what surfaces. The next time you form a fast opinion, pause and ask where it came from before deciding whether to voice it. Choose one small daily habit and perform it with the full attention of a craftsman, rather than the autopilot of routine. When you're in physical or emotional discomfort this week, ask what it might be teaching you, rather than only how to end it. Notice one moment today where you agreed with a group opinion faster than you examined it, and sit with that observation, instead of correcting it immediately. The famous Nietzsche gets quoted. The quieter Nietzsche gets ignored because he doesn't offer a slogan. He offers a mirror held up to the small, unremarkable moments where most people never think to look. The busy morning, the fast opinion, the solitude you thought was peaceful, the pride quietly rewriting your past. These aren't dramatic revelations, they're ordinary Tuesdays. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling thing Nietzsche ever wrote. Not that life is a battle against grand external forces, but that the smallest, most unnoticed moments of your day are already deciding who you are. The question was never what you believe. It's whether you noticed yourself believing it.